My name is Tessa Whitmore. I'm 32 years old, a dental hygienist living in Fort Collins, Colorado. For years, my life was small but comfortable. I rented a little townhouse, drove an 8-year-old Honda, spent Sundays with my parents, and had a close relationship with my older brother, Daniel. At least I thought we were close. My parents had owned a modest 2-story house for almost 30 years. It wasn't fancy, but it was the only place that had ever felt permanent to me. I grew up there. My mother taught me how to bake in that kitchen. My father measured my height against the hallway wall every birthday. When my mother died, my father became quieter. I started visiting him almost every evening after work. My brother didn't. Daniel lived about 40 minutes away and had a busy construction business. He always had an excuse. I'm just slammed right now, Tess. You understand how much work I have. Take care of Dad for me, okay? And I did. I bought groceries. I drove Dad to appointments. I paid bills when he forgot. I even spent nearly 3 months helping him recover after he fell in the backyard. I never thought of it as a sacrifice. He was my father. Then one cold November evening, everything changed. I came home from work and found my father sitting at my kitchen table. Daniel was beside him. Neither of them looked at me. Dad finally said, "Tessa, you need to pack a few things." I laughed because I honestly thought it was a joke. "Pack for what?" Daniel looked at my father, then he looked at me. "You can't stay here anymore." Remember staring at him for several seconds. "Stay where?" "In Dad's house." My stomach dropped. I had been staying there temporarily because Dad needed help recovering. But I had also been paying the utilities, buying food, and sleeping in the guest room. I thought Dad wanted me here. My father wouldn't look at me. Daniel placed a folder on the table. "We've decided it's better if you move out." "Who's we?" Silence. Then my father whispered, "Daniel is handling my affairs now." That sentence hurt more than anything else. I looked at my father. "Dad, did I do something?" He finally raised his eyes. "Been controlling too much." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Been helping you," Daniel interrupted. "That's exactly the problem. You made yourself indispensable." I felt something inside me crack. I packed 2 suitcases that night. My father didn't stop me, neither did Daniel. I drove back to my townhouse crying so hard I had to pull over twice. For the next few weeks I kept asking myself the same question. What had I done wrong? Then the strange things started. A credit card I had helped my father open was suddenly cancelled. A utility account I had been paying disappeared from my name. And one afternoon I received a letter from an attorney saying I had been accused of taking money from my father's account. I nearly dropped the letter. I called Daniel. "What is this?" His voice was cold. "You should probably talk to your lawyer." "I don't have a lawyer." "Then get one." He hung up. That was the moment I stopped crying. I realized they weren't simply pushing me out. They were building a story about me. A story where I was the greedy daughter who had taken advantage of an elderly father. And Daniel was the responsible son who had supposedly saved him. I hired an attorney named Rebecca Collins. She didn't promise me anything. She simply said, "Before we do anything, we're going to find out exactly what happened." That sentence gave me something I hadn't felt in months: control. I gathered every receipt I had, every bank statement, every text message, every medical appointment, every grocery receipt, every payment I'd made for my father. I even found old text messages from Daniel asking me to pay certain bills because he was short until Friday. Rebecca noticed something strange. "These accusations started right after your brother took control of your father's finances. Then we need to see what changed. For months I did nothing dramatic. I went to work, I saved money, I rebuilt my life. I moved into a small apartment closer to my dental office. I started running in the mornings. I stopped calling my father. That was the hardest part. But I knew if I kept begging him to believe me, I'd remain trapped in the same emotional place. So I quietly moved forward. 2 years passed, then 3. By the 4th year I had become someone I barely recognized. I wasn't rich. I hadn't suddenly become famous. I was simply stronger. I became a supervisor at the dental clinic and eventually started taking evening classes in healthcare administration. I bought a small house with a modest mortgage. For the first time I had a life that didn't depend on whether my family approved of me. Then, 5 years after I was kicked out, I received an invitation. My father was selling his house. Daniel was hosting a family gathering before the sale. I almost threw the invitation away. Instead I went. When I walked through that front door, nobody recognized me at first. I had cut my hair shorter. I wore a simple navy dress and carried a leather folder. Daniel stared at me. "Tessa," I smiled. "Hi, Daniel." He looked genuinely uncomfortable. My father came out of the kitchen. He stared at me for a long moment, then his face changed. "Tessa," I nodded. He hugged me. I stood there stiffly. I wanted to forgive him, but forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. Daniel pulled me aside. "You look good." "Thanks. Things have changed." "I know," he lowered his voice. "I think we should put the past behind us." I looked at him. "I agree." His shoulders relaxed, then I added, "That's why I brought these." I opened my folder. His expression changed immediately. Inside were copies of bank records, emails, signed documents, and correspondence collected over 5 years. Daniel's face went pale. "What is this? Your story?" He flipped through the pages, then stopped. One document showed a transfer from my father's account to Daniel's construction company. Another showed that the transfer had been described as a loan, but there was no loan agreement, no repayment schedule, nothing. I turned to my father. "Dad, did you know Daniel borrowed almost $87,000 from you?" My father's hands started shaking. Daniel immediately said, "That's not what happened." I looked at him. Then tell him what happened. He couldn't, because the real twist was something I hadn't known when I first left. Daniel hadn't pushed me out because he thought I was stealing from Dad. He pushed me out because Dad had begun questioning where his money was going. Daniel needed someone else to blame, and I was the easiest target. But there was more. The attorney my father had hired during those first accusations had kept copies of every document. Rebecca eventually obtained them through the proper legal process. One email from Daniel to that attorney contained a sentence that changed everything. "Look guilty because she's the one handling everything." He had planned the accusation before I even knew there was a problem. My father read the email twice, then he looked at Daniel. "Did you do this?" Daniel's voice cracked. "Dad, I was trying to protect the family." "What?" Daniel had no answer. The house sale was postponed. An independent financial review was ordered. The review uncovered several questionable transfers from my father's accounts. Daniel eventually had to repay a significant portion of the money and face the consequences of the financial misconduct. I didn't receive some giant fortune. I didn't destroy him. I didn't need to. His own decisions had finally caught up with him. My father and I had a long conversation that night. He cried. So did I. "I'm sorry," he said. I looked at the man who had once measured my height against the hallway wall. "I needed you to believe me." "I should have," I whispered. "You should have. We didn't magically become the family we used to be. Real life doesn't work that way. Trust takes years to build and sometimes only minutes to destroy." But my father and I slowly began talking again. As for Daniel, I haven't spoken to him in years, and honestly, I don't feel angry anymore. 5 years earlier, they had kicked me out believing I had nothing. They were wrong. I had my skills, my work, my dignity, my memories. And most importantly, I still had the ability to rebuild. When I left that house the second time, I didn't feel like the rejected daughter anymore. I felt free. I used to think revenge meant making someone hurt the way they made you hurt. Now I understand something different. The strongest revenge isn't watching someone lose everything. It's becoming so secure in who you are that the people who once controlled your life no longer have any power over you. They kicked me out with nothing. 5 years later, they couldn't recognize me. And maybe that was the greatest victory of all, because I didn't become someone they couldn't recognize. I became someone I finally recognized myself.